and welcome back to the... Wait, I just remembered. We're not calling our show Nostalgic Nuggets anymore. We renamed it to the Colin and Jared Show.
Yes, we did.
Because I'm Colin, he's Jared, and the person who... and the woman on the screen is actually our special guest star, Miss Stefanie,
Eskander.
What?
Eskander.
Okay, sorry. We have trouble pronouncing names sometimes.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Anyway, this is our first time doing an interview, especially with someone who is actually a toy designer. So, Stefanie, thanks for agreeing to be on our show this week.
I am really happy to be here with two nice, young, talented men as you.
Thanks. Now, I've been looking at your Instagram profile, and I understand that you actually design baby dolls, play sets, and officially licensed toys. Is that true?
I design so many kinds of toys. Not too many action figures, but
that's fair.
Even though I've done so many dolls of all kinds, my most successful toy is actually the WWF Wrestling Buddy, which you can see over my shoulder.
Is that supposed to be Hulk Hogan?
That's Hulk Hogan.
Actually, looking at that Hulk Hogan plush, it's reminding me of his cameo in Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
Yeah.
Or when he was in Muppets from Space, I believe?
I think I missed that one. I'm surprised that I missed it.
How did you first get started at designing toys?
Well, it's kind of a long, involved story. I'll try to make it short. Actually, I'm kind of one of those people that could tell this story and embellish it a lot and make it last for hours, but I'll try to keep it concise. I started out my career as an advertising illustrator. Got my degree in illustration, but I always specialized in children's art. So I illustrated for children's magazines, and in my advertising career, I did a lot of art that was for children, like doing artwork for Taco Bell or Universal Studios or Disneyland, things that had kids. And then in the early 80s, I began illustrating for Mattel's ad agency in California, and worked for Mattel's and Tomy Toys ad agencies, doing storyboards and other types of artwork. And then at the end of 1984, I was invited to come to a Mattel job fair. And even though I didn't have any experience designing toys as such, I had designed some puzzles and some doll boxes. I really had any product. But I went to this job fair and showed them my portfolio, and they hired me. Boom, just like that.
Wow.
And when I went to work, they asked me if I wanted to be in the packaging department, which was really kind of what I did. I was a graphic designer, illustrator. Working in packaging would have been really similar to what I did, but they also gave me the choice of being a product designer and designing dolls. And that sounded like so much more fun. So I said I'd like to be in the product design group. And so I joined Mattel at the very end of 84, beginning of 85 in the dolls group, not the Barbie group, but large and small dolls. And so that's how I got my start. So I learned kind of from the ground up how to design three-dimensional products and dolls, and it just kind of went from there.
Wow, you actually worked with Mattel?
I actually worked for Mattel twice. I started at Mattel and stayed just a little more than a year. And I had just had a baby. I had 2 kids already. So I had been out of college for 10 years before I got into the toy industry, which means I'm kind of a late bloomer. A lot of my colleagues came to Mattel or came to the industry right out of college, but I'd been out for 10 years. So I had 2 kids, and then I had a third while I was at Mattel that first year. And we were living in Hollywood in a tiny little cottage, and we decided it was just too small for us. And frankly, the culture, Mattel culture, wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I'm kind of a, artiste and free-spirited and kind of, casual person. And the culture there was rather formal and corporate. And I mean, it was an awesome company, obviously, awesome colleagues and projects. but every company has a culture. So I put out my feelers, and I was recruited to come and work at Hasbro. So I left Mattel in January of 1986 and went to Hasbro for the next 4 years. And so we moved our family to Rhode Island.
Wow.
And it was an awesome experience. Hasbro was a great company. I was in the dolls group there. They had three groups in the girls division. There was a My Little Pony group. There was a dolls, and then there was another group that did play sets and activity toys and things like that. So I was in the dolls group and had wonderful projects. Worked on Gem, worked on Moon Dreamers, worked on My Beautiful Doll, Dolly Surprise, Sweetie Pops, just many doll lines.
Wow.
When I was at Mattel, I'll backtrack a little bit. When I was at Mattel, I worked on Rainbow Bright and Popples.
I think I heard of Rainbow Bright.
Yeah, I think you heard of Rainbow Bright. And
yeah, I actually remember being a movie with Warner Brothers, right?
Well, Rainbow Brights had lots of iterations, but yes. Anyway, you might see over my shoulder back here, there's some Popples. And that was a very, very successful line that I worked on at Mattel. Okay, so I came to Hasbro in 1986 and really enjoyed my experience there. But at the very end of 89, again, I was recruited away by a fellow who had been the head of the boys marketing team, or I guess it was in play school. He was the head of the play school boys marketing team, and he and I got acquainted. And so he recruited me to move out to Minnesota to work for Tonka Toys. So the very end of 1989, I went out to Minneapolis area and began working for Tonka, that's where I designed the wrestling buddies that you see, Hulk Hogan, and there were 8 wrestling buddies that I designed. And I designed cupcake dolls and a bunch of other projects, and really loved Tonka. Great culture, great colleagues, small company. But sadly, in 1991, early 1991, Hasbro bought Tonka. And at that time, Tonka owned Kenner, Kenner Toys, and Parker Brothers, the game. And so when Hasbro bought all 3 companies, and they absorbed Parker Brothers because they already owned Milton Bradley. So they were 2 game companies. So they absorbed Parker Brothers. They decided Kenner, which was larger than us, down in Cincinnati. And they, of course, successfully did Star Wars toys and so many other Strawberry Shortcake and Care Bears and so many other really iconic products. They decided to leave Kenner in place, but they decided to shut us down. So at the end of 1991, we closed our doors. And from a personal standpoint, I just had a baby, our 4th child. And it was kind of an awkward time to think about moving or going to another company. I didn't want to go back to Hasbro. I could have done that because they bought us, but that seemed like a step backwards to me. I went down to Kenner and interviewed at Kenner, but I was at that time, before the doors closed, I was very pregnant and thought they're not going to want to hire somebody that's, a pregnant person. And I just wasn't really sure what to do. So after Tonka closed its doors and I had my baby, we decided we liked the Minneapolis area. So we stayed for a while, and I started freelancing for a short amount of time. So, I'm rocking my baby with one foot and drawing with the other. And I began what was the beginning of a off and on but lengthy freelance career. I began working in the spring of 1992 with a man who became my agent. He was an inventor, had an inventor company. And, in the toy industry, it's really hard for an inventor to just go to a toy company, present their idea. The bigger toy companies don't want any of that. They want to deal with reputable inventors, reputable agents. If you're a little toy company, you might be more open, but then a little toy company isn't going to have the resources and the sales to make a toy successful. extremely successful. So inventors, of course, being, the type of people that they are, they want their products to be successful. So the larger toy companies, of course, are going to receive the lion's share of the inventor concept. So anyway, this inventor company, it was actually several brothers that had this company. They reached out to me, and I began freelancing for them. And I came up with a concept for a doll that they sold to Fisher-Price.
Oh yeah, you did work at Fisher-Price, didn't you?
I did, right. So Fisher-Price was so impressed that they hired me. So we again moved, and so now I have 4 kids, a husband and 4 kids. And we moved again. We left Minneapolis, loved Minneapolis, but we left and we went to Western New York, where Fisher-Price is located, and loved that. The little town of East Aurora is the town where Fisher-Price is. It's about 20 miles southeast of Buffalo. So we moved there, and I began my next little leg of my toy journey at Fisher-Price. And Fisher-Price, like Tonka, was a delightful place to work. It had been kind of like a family. It was one of those companies, even though it was fairly large as toy companies go, a lot bigger than Tonka was. Many of the employees had been there for decades. It wasn't unusual to have somebody retire after 30 years or, 25 years. People tended to stay there. And it was a really lovely company, and I had great colleagues who worked on great projects.
Aww.
But here we have another little wrench in the works. Mattel bought Fisher-Price in 1994, and I came there in 1992, so I'd only been there a couple of years. And when I heard that they bought us, I was devastated because I knew what had happened when Hasbro bought Tonka. They just closed our doors and, kind of messed up our brands and things like that. But I stayed around about another year or so. And then Mattel, who bought Fisher-Price, they were really well known for their dolls. Of course, Barbie and other dolls, successful dolls. And they had the kind of resources to do dolls, rooters and stylists and all, a huge sewing department that were able to create the fashions for these dolls, which Fisher-Price didn't really have. And so they actually offered to transfer me back to Mattel.
Oh, that's awfully nice of them.
Keep my seniority. I would keep the time that I had spent at Fisher-Price because now they own Fisher-Price, right? And the timing couldn't have been better because at this point, my kids were growing up and their grandparents all lived in California. Most of their family did because that's where we were from. And I really wanted my kids to have the experience of knowing their aunts and uncles and their cousins and their grandparents. And so in the spring of 1995, we moved back to California. And so, but I went back to Mattel. Remember how I mentioned how culturally Mattel was probably not my favorite company. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage Mattel because I owe so much of my career to Mattel and the wonderful people I worked with. It's just some companies just have a culture that are just more difficult. It's like, if you work for a fun tech company versus working for IBM, it's just the companies have their rules and regulations and the things that they emphasize. And the creative person, I like the fun and the playful aspects of toys and maybe not the heavy-duty bureaucracy of a toy company. But we went back to California, and I went back to work for Mattel, worked on Cabbage Patch Kids at Mattel and other doll lines. And it was, again, wonderful colleagues, great product lines, but I was kind of done with working full-time.
Well, I know they were a big hit in the 80s. Was that when they were first introduced?
They first came out in 83, right.
Well, I couldn't really understand the whole premise of Cabbage Patch Kids. I mean, babies born from cabbages?
yeah. You know,
I don't even want to know how that person came up with the idea.
Well, I think it came about because of kind of a mythology that was told to children way back in prior years that where did babies come from? Well, they were found in the Cabbage Patch, and that was just something that probably in the 19th century, 18th century. You know, people told kids because they didn't want to get into the birds and the bees and the actual, you know, education. So they made up this kind of, you know, like the stork brings the kids. Well, this was the babies in the Cabbage Patch.
Right.
And so
exactly.
The origins of the Cabbage Patch are for a whole other episode. But the original Cabbage Patch Kids were soft sculptures. They were, I believe, they were called Little People. The inventor of the Cabbage Patch Kids, who was not Xavier Roberts, who marketed them and produced them later with Coleco and other toy companies. But it was a woman that was a craftswoman, and she would go to county fairs and things like that and sell these little people, and each one had a birth certificate. They were found in the Cabbage Patch, and you adopted them. And so the idea was that any child could be a mommy or a daddy by adopting these little babies that there were no two alike. And so you would find a Cabbage Patch Kid that looked like you. You could have one that had dark curly hair, or one that was blonde.
One that looks like me.
One that looked exactly. And there were boys and girls. It wasn't all girls, but you know, it was
of course
a lot of girls, but not all girls. So boys had Cabbage Patch Kids. So originally, Cabbage Patch Kids were produced by Coleco.
I heard of that company.
And they did a lot of wonderful toys. Unfortunately, you know, I'm not going to give a whole toy background, and I don't claim to be an expert on Coleco, but I think they put a lot of eggs in the Cabbage Patch basket. And just like many toys, you know, the lines got more and more expensive. They expanded. They made more and more dolls and more accessories and things. And eventually they had to file for bankruptcy. And so it was a license. I mean, Coleco did not invent Cabbage Patch Kids. They had the license, which was owned by Xavier Roberts, who was the man who marketed Cabbage Patch Kids. Yeah. And so the Cabbage Patch Kids next went to Hasbro, and they came to Hasbro, I believe it was 1989. So it was my last year there, but by that time, by 1989, I was in the play school division, and they went to the dolls group. And so I didn't work on Cabbage Patch Kids at Hasbro. So then fast forward, now we're back in 1995, and I've gone to Mattel, and the year before, Mattel got the license for Cabbage Patch Kids. So it was a huge part of our group. We were the large and small dolls group, so we worked on what we call Little Miss dolls, Polly Pocket, Cabbage Patch Kids.
I've heard of Polly Pocket.
Oh yes, Polly Pocket. I've done a lot of work on Polly Pocket. So anyway, I'm just kind of giving you a general overview of I spent most of my time at Mattel the second go round working on Cabbage Patch Kids and some other dolls. So at the end of 1997, I decided to make the big break, and I left Mattel to freelance and to, you know, see if I had enough experience and enough talent to run my own business. And it was just fabulous. I mean, I can't tell you how busy I was. I started working relationships with a number of companies that treated me well, MGA, Playmates. I did so much more work for Mattel because they knew my background, and they were able to, after a few months, they were able to start hiring me. I continued to work on Cabbage Patch Kids for many years. Worked on Polly Pocket, worked on Winnie the Pooh, worked on Barbie accessories. Never did Barbie dolls, but I did a lot of Barbie play sets.
By the way, did you see the trailer for that upcoming Barbie movie being made by Warner Brothers?
Yes, I have seen it. So I did, I spent the next almost 10, well, let's see, from it was about 10 years, 10 or 11 years, I spent freelancing in my little home studio. And, I like to tell the story. The interesting thing about the toy industry at the time I left Mattel was technology. We didn't everything that I drew was drawn by hand. Every color rendering I did was drawn with marker and colored pencil, and was
I work with markers and colored pencils.
Well, then it can be hard. I would have to ship or hand deliver I lived about an hour from Mattel. It wasn't unusual to see me, hopping in the car, driving down to Mattel to deliver a presentation rendering or series of drawings.
Yeah.
We had computers, but back in the mid-90s, we didn't all have our own computers. And
we had technology was still new at the time, right?
We had like a computer lab. And in our group, the girls group, the dolls group, I should say, there were probably about 8 to 10 designers. We had one computer, and that was outside my office. I was the designated computer operator. And I learned Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. I learned it. I wasn't great at it yet, but I took some classes and began to use it. Yeah. But it was I still pretty much did everything by hand. But we did use the computer. I designed a lot of graphics for some of the Cabbage Patch Kids, fabric design, accessory design. I did all that on the computer. But when I left Mattel and started my own business, I didn't have enough money for a computer. We were using Macs. This is about the time the first iMacs came out. Remember the Bondi Blue, those big blue? Do you guys remember those computers?
I think I do.
The first I know the name iMacs by those extended enhanced movie theater things.
They were so cool, but they cost about $1,200 in $1998, $1999. That was a lot of money. And so I didn't have that kind of money. So I would go to Kinko's. Kinko's used to have computers you could rent, and I would go and rent the computer for however many dollars an hour, sit at the computer, and they had Photoshop and Illustrator in those computers. And then finally, after about a year, I'd saved enough money and I bought my first computer. And then that just kind of exploded my world, because now that I was freelancing, I had to be able to do everything for my clients. When you're in-house, when you're working for a company like Mattel that's big, if there's something you can't do, there's somebody else that can, right? You've got an engineer over in the office down the hall. You've got a sculptor around the corner. You've got all these people that can do things for you if you can't do them. So you can kind of stay specialized. When I went on my own, I had to really broaden my skill set because I didn't have anybody else. I couldn't subcontract out work. Every job that came to me, I took. And so I had to learn to design play sets. I had done a few play sets when I was in-house or at the different toy companies, but most of my work was dolls or plush, stuffed animals, plush.
Right.
Since you actually design toys, what does it take to actually design a toy that's original or based on a licensed character?
Well, that's a good question. I think that I prefer coming up with original concepts. I've done a lot of licensing toys, but it's my least favorite thing to do. And that's because there is so much approval that has to be done by the licensor. So say I'm doing a Disney project.
Yeah, I remember the Disney stuff.
So strict, and they have what they call their style guides. All the Disney, say you're doing Disney princesses, and it's got every color and every pose and every, she doesn't do this, she does this, that kind of thing. And so it's a little bit restrictive. So
very specific about how they want their products to work, right?
Right. They're a lot more open about features, meaning if you wanted to do a mechanical Rapunzel that could climb up a tower, and you came up with a mechanism for that, they would be open to that. But they would want that doll to look exactly the way it's supposed to look. If you wanted to make Rapunzel riding a bicycle, now, of course, that's out of her character, so they would be really particular about the things that she could or couldn't do. But most of these companies, big licensing companies, are open to things that will enhance them. And I'll give you a really good example of that. Back in the early 90s, Tyco Toys, which doesn't exist anymore, Tyco was, I don't know whether, I think it was an inventor approached them with a giggling monkey plush. And so they brought in this giggling stuffed animal that was a little monkey that when you touched it, it would giggle. And it would wiggle and giggle and do all these cute things. And they really loved it. But the monkey just wasn't going to be a sell for them. And so what did they do? They had the license for Sesame Street.
You did do some Sesame Street stuff, didn't you?
Yes, I did. But I didn't work on this particular line. But this is how they took a concept that was not really attached to Elmo, right? I mean, Elmo is a fun character, but they didn't develop that tickling mechanism around Elmo. It was developed first, and then they said, let's try it with Elmo, and it became one of the biggest selling toys in history.
And that is known as Tickle Me Elmo, right?
There it is, excited.
And actually, speaking of Elmo, if you can't really see behind me, I have a replica, or a painted replica of the drawer that was seen in Elmo's world.
Oh, no, that's awesome. The point was that working on licensed properties can be really challenging. And I personally always like what I call proprietary concepts, meaning something that a toy company or an inventor envisions that becomes unique in itself. It may become a license, like Barbie, for example. I mean, Barbie was developed internally by Mattel, by Ruth Handler, who was the wife of the CEO, the founder of Mattel. And so it was developed in-house, but of course it became a licensing, giant later on. Everything's Barbie. You got Barbie purses, Barbie sleepwear, Barbie movies, right?
Yeah.
But working on properties that are already licensed, like say Strawberry Shortcake or any Care Bears, any number of those kind of properties, especially those that were popular in the 80s and 90s, which is kind of the golden age of toys. A lot of people feel that. And I was so glad to have been part of that. So, to answer your question, I think coming up with new and original ideas is more fun for me than working on licensed things. But if you work on licensed things, people know what you do. You can say, oh, I worked on Popples, or I worked on Jam, or I worked on, Strawberry Shortcake, or Polly Pocket, even though some of those started out as, in-house proprietary toys, like Jam. They became famous through their cartoon shows, their licensing, lunchboxes, and all that stuff.
We actually have the entire series of Gem and the Holograms on DVD.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, Gem was a really fun line to work on. It was a fashion doll, and I'm really not a fashion doll person. I've worked on fashion dolls. I prefer younger dolls, but...
So you like working on baby dolls?
I think the age of dolls that I like working on are what maybe toddlers and older. I mean, not necessarily. I do a lot of baby dolls.
Okay.
I know how you. I can actually relate because I like drawing baby-fied versions of cartoon characters.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. I've gotten really involved in the collecting community, being, having my Instagram and my book. I've written a book about my career. I have a lot of people that I interact with who are part of the collecting world. And a lot of those people collect contemporary things that are out, Monster High or Rainbow High or, contemporary action figures and things like that, which are wonderful. I mean, I love that. But my interest in toys is children. I love kids. I love my kids. I have 7 grandkids. I'm a fan of kids, and I love talking to adults about the toys that they loved as kids. Aww. But I prefer not to design for adults, even though that's getting to be a really big market. Gem, for example, Hasbro allowed Integrity Toys, I think it was in 2015, to have the Gem license, and they produced Gem dolls that were much larger than the original Gem, very sophisticated. They sold them for a number of years. I'm not sure the status of the Gem license today, but they were designed for adults. They're not kids, and they're beautifully done. I mean, the detail and everything, very expensive. There's just some sort of, I won't say innocence, because Gem wasn't, it was a very sophisticated line, but playfulness, I guess. It's got an edge to it that's not really suitable for kids. And so I like the idea of kids staying young and playing with toys for as long as they can and being engaged with playthings. And of course, I have no problem with kids never growing up and playing with toys when they're adults. Look at my office, it's full of toys. Some of us
get it hard, I guess.
Absolutely. But I design for children. I really think it's important to have kids have engaging toys that encourage creativity and open-ended play and
like Legos.
Absolutely like Legos. Legos are brilliant because it's such a solid play pattern, to build and construct and to create. And so, for me, I prefer toys that are more open-ended, more using the child's imagination, creating. But I also love to put lots and lots of detail in the toys and play sets that I design that are magical for kids. And so, that's kind of my philosophy. I'm really a children's toy designer, not an adult toy designer. And I appreciate adults' interest in toys that are for children. Mm-hmm. But, my audience is, probably 3 to 6 years old. I remember when I was a child growing up, the circus was a really awesome thing. There was Ringling Brothers Circus, and going to the circus was phenomenal. And every toy back, I'm not this old, but, toys from the 30s and the 40s, they always had circuses and circus animals and circus play and clowns. And what happened, I think in the 60s, clowns started becoming evil. You had killer clowns. You had
Pennywise, right?
Yes, and clowns became scary. Clowns were not scary when I was a child. Clowns were fun. People would have birthday parties, and there would be a clown there, and nobody would run around screaming. And they had clown TV shows, Chucko the Clown and Bozo the Clown, all these, because they were fun and happy and so what I'm saying is a modern culture can take something innocent like a clown and turn it into something evil.
Exactly.
And scary.
Yeah, not every clown in the world has to be a psychopathic child murderer.
Right.
It's really, really sad.
So it is sad. So, they did that with Chucky. They took, I guess it was probably based on My Buddy, Hasbro Play School's My Buddy doll. And, you take a doll and now you see people who take doll heads and turn them into evil. And hey, I love creativity and invention. I can laugh along with that. But, I think there's certain things that I think should be kind of off limits. And scaring kids is kind of one of those things I'm not a big fan of.
Exactly.
So when you're designing say a baby doll, for example, do you take inspiration from like videos and photos you see on the internet, or do you get inspiration from your own kids?
That's a really good question. Everything. When I'm starting a project, and again, I have done, I don't know, dozens, I guess, of designs for baby dolls in the last couple of years. I go on the internet. I have grandkids. I look at photos of them, or I have a little granddaughter that's 3 that lives nearby, and I sometimes will sketch her. I just pay attention, I think I have a pretty strong ability to come up with different facial expressions. I don't try to copy things exactly, but I will go online and I'll look and download all kinds of pictures. A lot of them are kind of like stock photos. I'm not going to take somebody's personal baby pictures without permission, but
of course.
All these stock photos. I often design different ethnicities, so there might be a black babies or Asian or Hispanic or different things. So I want to make sure that the features are true to ethnicities and are we don't want to have a white doll that they just put dark skin on, have the same sculpt. Nowadays we want to be a lot more
respectful of other people's races.
Yes,
respectful.
exactly.
Yeah,
we want to be a lot more respectful of, and so you try to pick faces that are charming and interesting, but it can be challenging to come up with those enough of those kind of faces. And I might design like 30 at a time for a client who comes to me and wants baby, and I might draw 20, 30 faces, and then they pick the ones they like the best. And then from there, I developed tighter renderings and take it so that it can be sculpted. I work with 3D sculptors and traditional sculptors, to make sure that the sculpture is representative of my artwork and has, the features that I'm looking for. And they don't usually look identical, but we work until I'm happy with the proportions and everything looks fine. So it's really fun. But I do a lot of younger dolls. I would say dolls that are maybe, babies all the way up to maybe what we call tweens. American Girl dolls.
Yeah,
so
I heard of those.
Yeah, American Girl doll age.
Actually, have you ever designed baby dolls based on cartoon characters? Like, I know that the Disney Princess has a whole series of baby dolls based on the different characters, like Baby Ariel, Belle, Cinderella, Snow White.
I have done those. I have done baby Disney characters. I've done Cinderella and Snow White.
Really?
I've actually seen many of those in the marketplace. Now, besides baby dolls, you also designed toys based on the Sesame Street characters, right?
I have done those. Sesame Street have all been for my inventor agent. And as far as I know, I don't think any of them were ever produced. I was telling you the story about me working with this inventor agent starting back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I stayed,
Toys, right?
I started working with him basically until he retired just a couple of years ago. So when you're an inventor, when you're an agency that does the inventing, the toy companies come to you and they give you a wish list. So they'll say, "Oh, we're looking for a fashion doll that does this, or we're looking for a electronic learning toy that does this other thing." They'll go, and then the inventors will come out to their people that do all the hard work and say, "Here's our wish list. Fisher Price is looking for a soft doll that, is a, like Doc McStuffins, is a doll that, helps people who are hurt, that kind of thing."
Yeah, we definitely heard of the Doc McStuffins TV series.
Right, so they'll come and they'll give us a wish list, and from time to time, it will be the company that does the licensing for, say, Barbie or for Sesame Street or Cabbage Patch or whatever.
Right.
And so I've done some Sesame Street. I did some Abby Cadabby concepts. I did some Elmo concepts.
Yeah, you actually designed the Hokey Pokey Elmo doll from 2003, right?
I'm trying to think if I know when the Hokey Pokey Elmo came out, they wanted another one that was going to be similar. And so I did one that was head, shoulders, knees and toes, that one.
Oh, yeah, that one.
So that was the one that I did.
So when you were designing these toys based on the popular Muppets from the show, did you actually have to go to the Jim Henson Company's workshop to look at the Muppets and get reference?
No, in the old days, I probably would have. Before the internet, it would have been harder to find things. But there were always books and magazines and things like that you could find. But, with the internet, or if I'm working with a company, then they'll send me their style guide. I did a bunch of Berenstain Bears toys.
Berenstain Bears?
Yes, I did a line of Berenstain Bears infant products, baby products.
Ooh.
So
what?
Gee, you did a lot of stuff during your toy designing career.
So anyway, they sent me the style guide, for the characters, and I used that. So no, it would have been awesome to go to the workshop. One of my friends at Fisher Price had worked for Jim Henson, and she was a puppeteer and did some amazing work. Oh my gosh! So
what was her name?
Her name was Jan Stefura. She passed away in 2009. But she was, she was amazingly talented. She worked on, name some of the movies Dark Crystal. I think she worked on Dark Crystal and the Sesame Workshop. And so she really had quite a lovely resume.
I actually have one more question. So what inspired you to become an artist in the first place? I mean, what was like your spark?
I think probably when I was in my crib and my mom gave me my first Crayola and I drew on the wall. I can't ever remember a time when I wasn't drawing. So I think I started wanting to draw for children when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I was an avid reader, always reading. And I started noticing the illustrations in these books, and I very early developed certain illustrators that I looked for, and I would read their books, the books that were illustrated by them, because I loved their work so much. And, that just kind of suited me. I always wanted to draw kids. I didn't want to draw adults, or I didn't want to draw motorcycles. I didn't want to draw cars. I wanted to draw kids. And that's what I did. I was a kid myself, and that desire never left me. I mean, when I grew up and was, I studied art, I was in college and I would be drawing all kinds of things. We had models that we were drawing from life. I love old buildings and old houses. I still draw old houses and old buildings. So there were things that I enjoyed, but the thing that I liked the most was drawing for kids. And so I can't really say there was one moment. I do remember reading Nancy Drew mysteries when I was a kid. So I must have been maybe 11 or 12. And each one of those books back then only had one illustration in it. And so I would just do my own. And I would stick it in the pages of the book because I thought that there needed to be more illustrations. So I just did my own. So I can't, like I said, I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a children's illustrator. I just never imagined that it would become a toy designer, that path, that never crossed my mind. It wasn't until I went to that job fair and they hired me. It was like, oh, whoa, this is really different from what I've been doing. So it was a magical time to make that change, and totally unexpected.
Stefanie, thank you very much for agreeing to be a guest star on our show.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
No problem. It was fun to chat with you guys. I do go on, so.
Yeah.
You're good.
Do you think you could possibly make like a drawing that we can put at the end of the video?
A drawing?
Like a little bonus treat from...
A little bonus treat, sure.
Yeah, sure. I could talk to you and we can figure something out.
Okay.
So, if all of you are still watching, be sure to like this video, comment below, and remember to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos every week. And from all of us to all of you, that's all, folks.
That's all, folks.